Nothing will harm her ever again.
Directed by Tony Reams, we are talking Spooked, and this came out in 2023 in the Fright Fest Festival, but hits general release in September of 2024. So this is kind of it feels somewhat like a young adult horror film, but it does have a couple of things that makes it a little mature. So it's somewhere between like a Goosebumps style family horror film and an actual kind of mature rated horror film. Somewhat of an odd tone. We'll come back to it. But effectively the story is these two rival investigators. One is a kind of a skeptic who goes out and kind of disproves paranormal phenomena. The other is a more local paranormal enthusiast, somewhat of an amateur ghost hunter. And both end up in this infamous house which has had a kind of sordid past, and the previous owner, played by Eric Roberts, our named actor in this movie, apparently did a lot of weird stuff, and there's a young girl who has gone missing in this house kind of 5 years or so before, and these two investigators have been tasked to try and find out what has happened. They don't get along. Think of a little bit like a Mulder and Scully dynamic. They're somewhat of at odds, a believer and a skeptic, but ultimately end up kind of working together to discover what the hell is going on, and it may be a little bit more complex than you initially think. So let's discuss what works in this movie's favour. Now I do think that the film sets up to be somewhat of a typical haunted house style movie, but it actually does try to have a little bit more going on in regards to what's actually happening. I don't think it's 100% clear about what actually is the sort of antagonistic force, you might say, but it's certainly more complex than just a simple haunted house, and makes for some intriguing paranormal phenomena that is a little different from your possession or hauntings and things like that. I think it's it tries to have a little bit of unique threat in some regards. So that was kind of quite cool. The dynamic between our two main characters is quite fun. We have a certain level of kind of animosity between these two initially, and you can understand why. And I think this movie is trying to have a little bit of a metaphor for people disagreeing with one another. Now, I think it's trying to obviously point fingers at the political situation in America, and it's using, a believer and a non-believer as a kind of a metaphor for somewhat, a political metaphor, basically. I think it does a fair point. It can go over your head, but I think the message is definitely there. But I quite like that dynamic, and I think the actors do an okay job here. As I've mentioned, the tone is a little odd, because it does come across as somewhat of a young adult movie. It's not a particularly graphic movie in any ways. But there is a couple of things. We have an orgy scene, and there's a couple of F-bombs, and there's a couple of sort of spooky moments. But it's the sort of, to get the rating up, it's the sort of the mature orgy scene, which is not nudity as such, but obviously it's an orgy scene. And so that kind of makes this a little bit more adult than the rest of the movie. Where the rest of the movie comes across like a kind of, as I say, a young adult sort of movie, which is kind of odd. Both our investigators are quite young. It is what it is. It's a little strange, that's all. I think some of the VFX quite interesting. It's obviously a relatively low budget movie, but it tries to have a couple of different things going on in regards to kind of a paranormal phenomena, and I think there are some reasonable sequences that I think are genuinely quite creepy. I think the creepiness is lost a little bit because of the light-heartedness of the movie around it. But if you just take these kind of sequences and you were to watch them in just a kind of like that scene on its own, there's definitely, you know, I think, well, I mean, that looks like it's from a creepy film. But when you put it in this, a little bit more of a bubblegummy film that surrounds it, it loses a little bit. But nonetheless, I do think there are some well put together sequences. What doesn't work, as I've kind of alluded to, I think that the tone of this movie is a little unclear about who its target audience is for. You know, we have two young women who are the kind of our leads. The way the movie is filmed, and they're kind of like somewhat kind of you know, influencer style kind of personas, and sort of general sort of bubblegumminess of the kind of the characters makes it feel very young adult. You know, young people going in and investigating a haunted house. Very Goosebumps. But it's the actual kind of end product, as I say, does have some mature themes. So I feel this movie's tone is a little bit of a mix, if I'm honest. As I've kind of alluded to as well, I think although I appreciate this plot is a little bit more complex about what's going on, let's just say the antagonistic force is more unique and has a little bit of a deeper plot than maybe some haunted house movies you've seen. I don't think it fully lands in regards to what the actual hell is supposed to be kind of going on, and I think it maybe has a little bit too many kind of tongs in the fire, where it seems to be multiple supernatural stuff, multiple kind of terrestrial stuff kind of going on, and it's just a little bit like, I think there's a little bit too much going on in regards to the bad stuff, and I don't think any of it is particularly kind of fully realised. I won't go too much into the next thing, but I will say there's a couple of odd choices that this movie makes, which I feel may put people off. It was a decision, it was a choice, they put it in, whatever, it's there. But I can see some choices not being, you know, particularly kind of popular, let alone, and I'm not even just talking about the tone of the movie here. As I say, the acting is I think is okay, but it does come across as a little bit teeny bopper, is the best way I would kind of describe it. Certainly in the first half of this film. And the movie sometimes I think could have done with a little bit more of a creepy atmosphere. There are sequences that I think work, but a lot of the time it just looks like some house, you know, because a lot of it is kind of filmed in the day. A lot of the dialogue sequences are filmed in the day, and it loses obviously the creepiness in the translation then. And then we do have some sequences of the night when this is where the more of the ghostly stuff going on. There's a little, it could have done with a little bit more build up. So we have these sequences I think are quite well done, but I think maybe it could have ratcheted up the tension by having a little bit more build up, a little bit more you know, atmospheric kind of, you know, lighting and things like this at times. So again, and I think that all comes down to, as I said, this more bubblegummy sort of tone, because it doesn't really do that. It feels like a kind of family movie. It feels like a Goosebumps movie or something like that. So it's a real mixed bag, this one, but I will say I was intrigued, if not fully cognizant of what was going on in regards to the plot. But I'll give it a 6 out of 10 because I think there's more here to enjoy than not. But it's a flawed movie. How you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.